Joe's on it. All right, what's up? What topics you got for us today?
We're talking about the highest paid athletes in the world.
Woo! Conor McGregor?
Big list. He's on there. He's not in the top 10, though. We have the top 10. Let's pull up the top 10.
Let's go. Oh, we got a list.
We got a list. Yeah, we got a few charts today. So all of this data is from Sportico. So Forbes and Sportico, they do these lists every year. Sportico does this. This guy, Kurt, he's very good at it, outlays everything. This is the top 10 from this year, from 2022, the last 12 months. LeBron James, highest paid athlete in the world, $127 million. Then you got a few soccer players, Messi, Ronaldo, Neymar. I love how Neymar, just his name. He did one name, Neymar. Then you got Canelo, Stephen Curry, Kevin Durant, Roger Federer, James Harden, and Tiger Woods. So there's a few different things about this list that I think is interesting. One, it's dominated. So he does the top 100. It's dominated by basketball players. And then if you look on each individual sport, so Matt, I think we have the chart of the highest paid athlete in each sport. Let's run through that, and then I can talk about a few takeaways, right? So LeBron James, highest paid basketball player, he's also number one in the world. So it has their overall rank to the left, 1 through 61, and then the sport, their winnings, their endorsements, and then the total. So LeBron makes $90 million. He made $90 million last year from endorsements. So the majority of his income comes from endorsements. He's at first. Messi's the highest paid soccer player in the world. Alvarez, boxer, the list goes on. A few things that are interesting here. Look at Roger Federer, right? He made $700,000 last year actually playing tennis versus $85 million not playing tennis.
Jesus.
Right? So literally the smallest amount of his income possible comes from tennis.
Why? Like, what is going on?
He's just built a massive brand. So he gets paid $30 million a year by Uniqlo, which is pretty substantial, right?
Yeah.
He used to have a 10-year deal. This is actually pretty fascinating. He had a 10-year deal with Uniqlo, or with Nike. Nike didn't want to pay him more because they have this roster of athletes and the margins.
He's just one of.
He's one of. And if you pay one person too much, their business wasn't big enough to justify that, basically. So he
And
left.
also they use it as comps. It's kind of like wide receivers. The NFL want to be the highest paid receiver. What's the last guy got paid?
So long story short, he left. He goes to Uniqlo. He got a 10-year, $300 million deal, $30 million a year. Doesn't have a retirement clause. He hasn't really played, right? He's been hurt and so forth. He's getting older. So even at the age of 46, when the last year of the contract, he'll still get $30 million a year, even if he retired when he was 40.
What is it? Bobby Bonilla?
Yeah,
right?
well, that was Bonilla. Yeah, it was a different circumstance, but like that's his deal, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't include a lot of that money too. It doesn't include shoes. Uniqlo doesn't have a shoe deal. So he partnered with Uniqlo, got equity. He owns 3% of the business. They went public at a $10 billion valuation. He owns $300 million of equity. I don't know when that actually is liquidated, but he's getting paid from that too.
Okay.
So I think there's a few other things, right? Look at Conor McGregor. He's still pretty high on the list. He's the highest paid, I don't know if that's just MMA or fighter or wrestling, whatever it is. But yeah, mixed martial arts, he is on there. He made $52 million last year, $32 million in winnings, and $20 million in endorsements. And I don't even know if he won a fight last year, right? So like when you think about it in that context, like he's still getting paid pretty well. But I think there's some other takeaways here that I wrote down that I think are pretty interesting. Let me see if I can pull them up. So Body Armor. Remember Body Armor sold to Coca-Cola for $8 billion?
Yes.
This includes some of the athlete payouts. Naomi Osaka got a 7-figure check. Highest paid female athlete in the world for the third year in a row. 24 years old. No big deal. Pretty substantial, right? She got a 7-figure check. James Harden, $20 million from the Body Armor deal.
That's crazy.
Pretty good, right?
$20 million?
He got $20 million when they sold to so he was an early ambassador for the, relatively early ambassador for the company. And the thing that Body Armor always did really well was they offered all of these athletes equity. Like not substantial amounts, right?
Yeah, but enough to make it interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So like some of them are getting 7-figure checks when the brand sells, which is pretty substantial. And if you're deciding between Gatorade or Body Armor or Powerade or any of these other businesses, like usually the equity is probably what gets you over the line. So they were notorious for doing that. James Harden was one of the earlier ones that got it at a lower valuation, obviously. He walked away with $20 million. Mike Trout got a payout as well, several other people. So back to the tennis thing, another takeaway was Roger Federer, Naomi Osaka, and Serena Williams earned just 1% of their pay from on-court earnings.
What?
Right? Yeah. So tennis players are earning the majority of their income, call it 90 to 99% for the largest people in the world, off of the court through endorsements and so forth, because the tennis winnings aren't as lucrative. And then on boxing side, Alvarez, Tyson Fury, Jake Paul all earned 90% or more of their income inside the ring, right? So if you look at the two sports, tennis players are earning all of their income outside of the court. Boxing's the complete opposite, where they're earning all of their money inside of it.
Can I push back on that idea for a second?
Go ahead.
Canelo earned majority of it inside the ring.
Yes.
I thought that and maybe it's just rumors on the internet, I thought he had some massive businesses. Like he owns a bunch of like gas stations in Mexico. He owns a bunch of companies and brands and all that. Is it just he owns that stuff and he basically took the winnings from inside the ring, converted it, and it doesn't produce enough return to like eclipse what he earned in the ring?
Yeah. So if you think about the businesses, obviously this list is difficult to,
of course,
determine how much income is coming off of businesses that you own and operate and all of this, right? So to your point, he owns gas stations, he owns a bunch of real estate, and he's getting quarterly, he's talked about it previously, he's getting quarterly dividends from that stuff, right? But he earned $84 million in the ring last year.
Yeah, so it's hard.
So it's hard to balance that out because they have him at $5 million outside the ring, still a lot of money, right? Maybe it's 10 million, maybe it's 15, maybe, whatever. That'd be triple. But even if it's that, he's still owning the majority of it inside the ring because boxers are paid so well, right? So this chart explains it really well, which is below the line means you're earning the majority of your money outside of your sport via endorsements. Above the line means you're earning the majority of it in your sport through salary and winnings.
Even like a Cristiano Ronaldo, which obviously is close to the line, but still he's getting paid more from playing the sport than from endorsements.
That's the difference in Europe, especially with soccer. Those players get paid absurd amounts of money, right? And in the NFL, in the NBA, and all of this, there's a salary cap. So if you think about, like, this is what we talked about with Tom Brady the other day, the highest or the best players in North American sports with salary caps are generally underpaid relative to other people because of the amount of money they can generate outside of the sport, for the sport, et cetera. So LeBron's a good example of that, right? Like he's making $90 million a year in endorsements. That's insane.
What also is interesting to me here is like Messi, Ronaldo, Neymar, they all make like a third more in salary, almost double in salary than LeBron James.
Yeah.
Like those are big numbers.
That's my
to be
point,
getting
though, right?
paid.
Like obviously soccer is the most popular sport in the world.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of money in it, especially for the big name people. But there's a salary cap, right? And there's max contracts. And like LeBron, you could argue just from an economic perspective, what did the championship in Cleveland have to do with the valuation of the franchise? What did it have to do for the local economy and all this stuff, right? And I don't even know if he was the highest paid player on the team that year. I think
and some of the big players end up getting less so that their teammates, they can get the right team.
Of course. But Miami, think about the same thing, right? They're capped because of the salary constraints of the league relative to the amount of money. Like if you think about Giannis Antetokounmpo, he deserves 2, 3, 4 times, you could argue, his salary. So if you look at the highest paid per sport, this is also interesting, right? Because they took the top 100 highest paid athletes in the world and they broke it down by individual sports. So cricket only had one. MMA was Conor McGregor. He was the only one on there. Racing has 2, which I believe was Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. Tennis had a few, boxing had a few, et cetera, and the list goes on. But basketball still dominates the list, right? It's 36 out of the 100. And then if you include football, North American sports are over half of the list, right? So outside of soccer, it's really dominated by sports here in the United States.
Yeah. I guess the other part is when you think about these athletes, they've all gotten much smarter about how do they make money outside of the ring, the field, the court, whatever. But I do wonder how much of LeBron's net worth, let's take him as an example, comes from building companies versus endorsement deals. Like I'm assuming those endorsement numbers don't include Spring Hill or other companies that he's built from scratch.
Well, I don't know how much, if he took any equity off the table when they raised money, right?
Yeah.
So Spring Hill raised at a $750 million valuation. He's a founder of that business. So I'm assuming he owns a somewhat meaningful portion of it still.
9 figures probably.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So, but my point just being like, so if he gets paid, I'm going to use just round numbers.
They only do it if there's an exit.
Yeah, so just 40 million in salary, 90 million in endorsements. Yeah. But if he sold Spring, let's say he owned 100%, if he sold for $750 million, my guess would be it wouldn't show up as an endorsement deal.
No, I think that like they include separate categories. They just called endorsements, I think, for the thing. But like Conor McGregor was the highest paid athlete in the world a year or two ago, whatever year it was, when he sold his liquor company. Right?
Got it. So they count. They do count the exits as part of this.
But right, they have to be like, we don't know what necessarily happened with the equity in the cap table when it came to Spring Hill. So I don't know if they know that either. Obviously, this isn't. It's more of an art than a science, and you can't determine it down to the dollars and cents. But you can get some direction on it based on kind of what they're saying. So maybe it's, 90% accurate. Maybe it's less than that. Maybe it's more than that. But I think it's relatively directional accurate. The one thing I think is interesting too is like some of the young people on the list, right? If you think about Naomi Osaka, she made over $50 million last year, highest paid female athlete in the world for 3 years in a row. But she's only 24 years old, right? So she announced today too that she is going to be starting her own agency. She's leaving IMG and doing what some of these other people like Roger Federer and others have done, which is partners with her agent at IMG, goes and starts a new business. They both own equity in it, and they try to go recruit other people. So we'll see if that works out, but that could be another way that she can increase her value and her brand and her equity. And then another young person was Max Verstappen. He's 24 years old also. He made $43 million last year. And the thing people don't realize about some of these other people are the Formula One drivers in particular, they all relatively own businesses outside of this. So like Max, for example, he owns all of his memorabilia and stuff like that. Every single race, you see him posting about it aggressively. Go buy this helmet, go buy this shirt, whatever. And they're able to generate new items for each race, right? It's like mini drops or mini collections. So those are going to be big businesses eventually just based on the amount of money and they're going to be able to generate. And then he's only 24 years old, right? If you're making $43 million a year in your low 20s, like the ability to just compound that over time is going to be super interesting to see where guys like that end up.
If you had to guess one athlete over the next 10 years that's not on people's radar, but you think will be one of the highest earners, who do you pick?
Well, like the caveat of not on people's radar is tough because, like I would say Patrick Mahomes if you left that line out, right? Because he's making $45 million a year every year for the next 10 years just on his salary alone.
Okay, but can he be a big enough star off the field on endorsements?
He already is, right? Football's the biggest game. Football is the most lucrative sports organization, sports franchise in the world, right? And he's one of the biggest stars.
But Tom, if you go back to the chart with the line, Tom Brady ain't getting paid anywhere near what LeBron James is getting paid.
Well, to be fair, Tom Brady has obviously...
Like Naomi Osaka.
Tom Brady has placed a premium on building his own businesses, which if you just take Autograph, for example, is I think they raised money last time at like a $3 or $4 billion valuation.
Yeah, but my point just being like, isn't that included in here?
I don't know, right? But my point is that football is the biggest sport in the world from a purely money standpoint, right? From the amount of money that surrounds the NFL. Purely money, it's the biggest sport. He's obviously got an opportunity to do that. Verstappen, again, I think what you do is you have to pick like a younger athlete who is guaranteed to make a certain amount of money, who's going to be famous and has this large audience that can monetize that correctly. So he's one, Verstappen's another. There's a bunch of others probably underneath that. But yeah, it's tough to say like who you would bet on necessarily. It'd have to be, someone who's young that's going to dominate their sport for the next decade.
Yeah. All right. My only last question for you is when you start to think about these athletes, how much of their revenue or earnings is going to come from investing versus building over the next decade?
Well, more would come from building if they built good stuff.
Yeah, but they're not really building it. Like none of these athletes are actually the CEOs.
What you do is what Tom Brady did, right? And he's had some businesses before that haven't been like TB12, the performance company. It's not a massive business. I wouldn't say that's like a huge win, right? He's still building it, and maybe it becomes something big later on. But it relative to what he could have made from partnering with a bunch of other brands, I don't know the economics, but I'm assuming it's either kind of even or something around there, right? Like he could have made a lot of money from endorsements. But if you look at Autograph, what he essentially did was, I don't know how it worked out, whether he went to someone else or they came to him, but he partnered with good entrepreneurs who knew how to build this business. He got equity in it because of his name, image, likeness, audience, all of that stuff. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar business. And even if he got 5%, 10%. So, something relatively small for a co-founder off the bat. It's hundreds of millions of dollars at this point, right? In equity that he owns in that business. And that's really what I think we're going to see is like these athletes, the smartest ones are going to become co-founders, right? They're going to be founders of these businesses and just find people that they know already are good operators, are good builders, and start these businesses together.